So, growth hormones are produced by the cells known as somatotropes, and one of the main functions of growth hormone is to reduce uptake of glucose by cells. So, it helps in increasing blood glucose indirectly, and it stimulates most cells in the body, but it mainly targets bones in the skeletal muscle, specifically the epiphyseal plate of long bones. So if you remember, the long bones grow at a region known as the epiphyseal plate, and that's how we grow taller, right? And the first thing that the growth hormone does is to act on the liver to synthesize something known as insulin-like growth factors or intrinsic growth factors. And the intrinsic growth factors or the insulin-like growth factors indirectly target bones and skeletal muscle and helps us grow taller. The other function of growth hormone is to increase protein synthesis. So in other words, it increases protein anabolism. So we make more protein, and it promotes something called as lipolysis. Lipolysis is using the fats or breaking down fats so we can use fat as fuels. So the regulation of growth hormone is performed by two hormones secreted by the hypothalamus. Now, growth hormone releasing hormone from the hypothalamus stimulates the anterior pituitary to release growth hormone. And when we have too much growth hormone, the hypothalamus secretes growth hormone inhibiting hormone, which is also known as somatostatin. Somatostatin has the word static, so this is an inhibiting hormone, and it reduces the effects of growth hormone. So somatostatin acts upon the anterior pituitary and tells the anterior pituitary lobe to stop secreting growth hormone. So the direct actions of growth hormones include stimulating liver and skeletal muscles and bones and cartilage to produce insulin-like growth factors so we can grow taller. And the other direct action is to perform lipolysis, and it elevates blood sugar by decreasing glucose uptake by cells. So this basically has an anti-insulin effect, okay? Because insulin is something that you're familiar with. Insulin is taken by diabetic patients when they have too much blood glucose. So growth hormone, on the other hand, helps in increasing blood glucose by decreasing the uptake of glucose by the body cells. So this picture shows the negative feedback inhibition of growth hormone. Now, when we need growth hormone, the hypothalamus senses the signal, and hypothalamus releases growth hormone releasing hormone. So the hypothalamus triggers or stimulates the anterior pituitary to release growth hormones. And one of the major effects that growth hormone has that it causes the body cells to take up less glucose. So it helps in increasing blood glucose indirectly. So we call this a diabetogenic effect because it promotes the increase in blood glucose. So the growth hormone stimulates the liver to break down glycogen into glucose. Glycogen is the form of sugar that the liver stores glucose in. And when we need glucose, the glycogen is converted to glucose and released into the bloodstream. So when the glucose is released into the bloodstream, the levels of sugar in the blood increase. Now, this increased blood glucose in turn stimulate several cells in the liver and other parts of the body to release IGF, which is insulin-like growth factors. So these IGFs stimulate bone cells, muscle cells, nerve cells, immune cells, anything that are involved in growth and development. So this enhances cell proliferation. So the cell divides and we grow tall and we grow big. And the other function of growth hormone is to cause lipolysis. So instead of using glucose for energy, growth hormone triggers breakage of fat. So it encourages the use of fats to obtain energy. So we call this a glucose sparing effect. So when we have too much blood glucose, we'll in turn end up having too much IGF. So when we have too much IGF, the signal is sensed by the hypothalamus, and the hypothalamus secretes growth hormone inhibiting hormone, and these inhibiting hormones inhibit the anterior pituitary lobe from secreting growth hormone. So there are a lot of terminologies that are a mouthful, so you're going to have to know the differences in releasing hormones, inhibiting hormones, and the major hormones that are secreted by the anterior pituitary gland. So just keep in mind, releasing and inhibiting hormones for the anterior pituitary are secreted by the hypothalamus, whereas the anterior pituitary gland secretes growth hormone. It secretes thyroid stimulating hormone. It also secretes gonadotropins that are follicle stimulating hormone and luteinizing hormone. And it secretes adrenocorticotropic hormone. And the last hormone that it secretes is melanocyte stimulating hormone. The growth hormone is regulated by negative feedback inhibition, like most hormones in the body. So when we have a low blood glucose concentration, the hypothalamus senses the low blood glucose and it secretes growth hormone releasing hormone. When the growth hormone releasing hormone reaches the anterior pituitary, it stimulates somatotropes, which are nothing but the cells that secrete growth hormone, right? So it stimulates somatotropes to release growth hormone. And the growth hormone stimulates secretion of insulin-like growth factors by the liver. And the liver basically converts the stored glycogen into glucose. This glucose enters the bloodstream very rapidly, and it leads to increase in the blood glucose level. Now, when there's too much blood glucose in the bloodstream, it causes hyperglycemia, means too much blood glucose. Hyper means above, glycemia is glucose. So when there's too much sugar in the blood, the values are basically sensed by the hypothalamus. And again, when you have hyperglycemia, it stimulates the release of growth hormone inhibiting hormone. So when we have hyperglycemia, there's another, well, keep in mind, right now we are talking about the inhibiting hormone. Okay, let me go again. So when we have hyperglycemia, the hypothalamus secretes growth hormone inhibiting hormone, which is taken down to the anterior pituitary gland. On reaching the anterior pituitary gland through the portal veins. The growth hormone inhibiting hormone inhibits the secretion of growth hormone by the anterior pituitary lobe. So when human growth hormone secretion is inhibited, the IGFs get inhibited. So we no longer secrete IGFs, and it leads to stabilization in the blood glucose level by the liver. So this process is known as negative feedback mechanism. So when we secrete too much growth hormone, it's called hypersecretion. When we secrete too little, it's called hyposecretion. So one symptom of excessive human growth hormone is persistent hyperglycemia, because keep in mind it promotes hyperglycemia by converting liver glycogen into glucose, and it releases into the bloodstream, so it raises blood glucose. So one of the most persistent symptoms is hyperglycemia. So when there's excessive secretion of human growth hormone in children, it leads to gigantism while they are growing and developing, because the kid ends up having too much of the growth hormone. Okay, but in adults that have stopped growing, if they end up secreting too much growth hormone, it basically leads to a condition known as acromegaly. Acromegaly is a condition wherein, the epiphyseal plates have already closed, so we can no longer grow tall. Instead, our hands and feet and forehead grow abnormally larger in size. So that condition only affects adults that are completely grown. In children, it results in gigantism. Now, hyposecretion in children results in dwarfism, because they end up not secreting enough growth hormone to grow tall. Now, like I said, one symptom of hypersecretion is hyperglycemia, and when there is persistent hyperglycemia, it stimulates the pancreas to constantly secrete insulin, because we have too much sugar. When we have too much sugar, the pancreas thinks we need to constantly secrete insulin and convert the blood glucose to glycogen. Such excessive stimulation, if it lasts for a long time, like months or weeks, it can cause the pancreatic beta cells to burn out, basically. And this decreases the capacity of pancreatic beta cells to synthesize and secrete insulin. And when that happens, it leads to the diabetic effect, or the diabetogenic effect that we talked about. And this condition that is caused is known as, let me write this down, okay, is called diabetes mellitus. Okay, diabetes, okay, mellitus. Okay, I don't know why I wrote so bad. Okay, ugly handwriting. But anyhow, diabetes mellitus is caused when the pancreatic beta cells basically burn out due to hyperglycemia. Okay, so mellitus means honey-like or sweet. So when a person has diabetes mellitus, their urine is basically sweeter in taste, and that was the way people tested for diabetes way back in the day when they didn't have a means or a test of the lab. So diabetes mellitus is a type 2 diabetes, and it is caused due to beta cell burnout when we don't have enough insulin. Some of the symptoms of diabetes mellitus include frequent urination, excessive thirst, the person is constantly hungry, and they also have weight loss. So just remember these major symptoms of diabetes mellitus, because there are several different types of diabetes. Okay.